right. Well, I think we should probably kick
Get
it off
to
here.
it.
So
The main thing is, while we're recording, we're not allowed to say the name of this college because it's trademarked and we didn't sign the proper forms.
Did
So we
someone
have
tell
to
you
be
that, or is
all.
that just for safety purposes?
No, they came and told us that.
Who was they?
The student activities people.
How'd they find you?
We had to, well, the environmental safety guy came out here to basically make sure that we had weights on the tent, but then he went and like told student activities we were here. They came out, we're like, oh, you need a reservation for this event. We're like, this isn't really an event, but okay. They said, oh, you have to take the tent down unless you have a fire extinguisher. So Nance went and bought a fire extinguisher because, if we could spontaneously combust,
just gotta keep the tent.
no amplified noise, and then we can't have any university imagery or say the name because that's trademarked. And we would need to have filled out the proper forms if we wanted to record ourselves saying where we are. So,
And we are officially recording, but we didn't say the name, and so we'll just say we are in Albuquerque.
I'm a professor of the University of New Mexico. So
But-
you can
but-
deduce from that where we are.
We won't say. We won't.
deny where we are.
Anne was saying we could do it like he who will not be named, with the university that will not be named.
Well, that gives it more power. So
Well, and I guess I want to kind of kick this thing off by we are technically recording. I'll just edit in at the beginning, but I just wanted to say, so we are at a Proto-Agora event, right? All the Proto-Agora events so far have been indoors and not live streamed and not with random passersby. At least we're outside with this one, but we don't have people coming in over Zoom, and it's definitely not live, though it will be online later. So shout out to the folks who'll see this later. The idea, the ethos here is speaking to the interstices between the niches. In the post-class fractured mass, everybody's in their little niches. We talk about this colloquially as the echo chamber effect. And theory and philosophy are already echo chambers. Theory and philosophy online, it gets more and more echoey. And so we're trying to get out here and be around regular people, even if some of them might not care about what we're doing. We have met some people who got excited about it and they're looking into it. But the main thing is a reminder for us in how we speak. Like, we're not having a secret conversation with people who get it. No, we're having a conversation in front of people who might just swing by and have no idea what's going on. And so Heidegger and death, and these are very important in my own thinking, and as is your work. And so, here we are with Dr. Iain Thompson at a university that shall not be named. And I guess I'll just let you say a few things, opening remarks about some of your work. But I will say we were just before you arrived reading, and was reading aloud.
Introduction to your new book.
Yeah, rethinking Heidegger on death, and so.
okay, not the AI book, which is the newest book.
No, not that one. No, maybe you could tell us a little bit about that as well.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me in your traveling agora. It's exciting to be here in this place that I will just call the University of New Mexico, because that's where I teach, and you're not allowed to say that, but I can, because how are they going to stop me? And I am a professor at the University of New Mexico, which I'll neither confirm nor deny that that's where we're at, but so it's interesting that we're in the interstices, because I've often described myself as a philosophical coyote who, a coyote I like because it's got the sense of a border crosser and a smuggler and a trickster. And I've always been somewhere in between the various philosophical camps. So too analytic for the continentals, too continental for the analytics. And I've come to like it that way. So, but I'm also intrigued by, I'm sure, the echoes you're talking about. I'd like to hear more about that. The chamberic effect of all of this. Hopefully I can bring some oxygen in, but I do have a tendency to speak philosophy. So please ask me if I say things that don't make sense. I've been doing this for about 30 something years now, since I was around your age. And I've studied with Bert Dreyfus was my first Heidegger teacher, and then a guy named Fred Olafson, and then a guy named Jacques Derrida. And then I've been at this place here for 25 years. So in that time, I think I've brought out 5 books and a lot of other things. There go the skaters. Sweet. And
Let's not forget
yeah,
also that that the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy page on art, Heidegger's theory of aesthetics, or his critique of aesthetics, right? Which was a huge help for me, and I think it was through that article that I discovered your personal website with all of your listed public work, and so really have appreciated that. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, my personal website used to be maintained by a former student of mine who went off and he's doing his own thing successfully now. So it's not terribly updated, unfortunately. But yeah, so it's a couple books back. A shout out to Adam Linson, who's doing experimental music now, but cool guy. Okay, so yeah, the Heidegger's aesthetic piece was the centerpiece of my 2011 book, which is called Heidegger, Art and Postmodernity, which was itself a follow-up to my 2005 book. There goes the cat. The 2005 book is called Heidegger on Onto-theology, Technology, and the Politics of Education. So that's where I developed my views of Heidegger's connection to Nazism, his relationship to the university, and his vision for the transformation out of the crisis of the university, etc., and his vision for a rethinking of what education means. And that was more focusing on the problems. The art book was more focusing on the solutions. So for Heidegger, art is sort of the way forward. It's like part of the path out of the nihilistic situation we've gotten ourselves into. And then I brought out a book on the history of philosophy from 1945 to 2015, and the Death book, which collects work I've been doing over that pretty much that whole period, but heavily weighted toward more recent stuff, is rethinking death in and after Heidegger, and that just came out in December. And then this month, I think a couple days ago, technically, on March 20th, my book called The Danger and Promise, Heidegger on the Danger and Promise of Technology in the Age of AI, just came out. So that's thinking about Heidegger's views on technology and how they apply to the latest technologies, especially genetic engineering and AI, but also self-driving cars and atomic weapons, which is a big thing here in New Mexico.
I kind of want to start with that, just your most recent work, and then maybe we could work backwards a little bit to death, because one of the things that you say is that your idea of it has changed. Yeah. Well, I think death is one of those things that a lot of people find interesting if they are questioning about existence. But on AI, I think that's just as interesting. And right now, everyone's questioning about that. The event we just did with Mikey, right? We're thinking about the future and AI and capital. And well, your mentor, you call him Bert. For me and Mikey, it's Hubert Dreyfus, right? And for those who do not know, his lectures on being in time online can be found on YouTube. Fantastic, fantastic, and it really unlocked being in time for us. So with that said, I think he said that there would be no self-driving cars, right? That it wasn't this kind of maybe you can help correct the record here, but I'm just interested in how your work kind of extends his project and kind of what you think he would have to say now about the current situation, which seems to be accelerating.
Great. Yeah, no, I've been talking a lot about this very issue. Just got back from North Carolina, where I was talking about Heidegger and death and Heidegger and AI the whole time. So, one of the dystopian films that I mention in the book is RoboCop. I don't know if it's RoboCop 2. It's a remake of RoboCop. And in the remake of RoboCop, two of the characters are named Hubert Dreyfus and Dennett. I can't remember if it's Dan Dennett or just Dr. Dennett. And Dennett's the bad guy and Dreyfus is the good guy in the fight against using militarized AIs to police the population. So I love that. And that came out of the fact that Dennett had been invited to critique Dreyfus on PBS in the aftermath of the defeat of Kasparov, the famous chess master, by Deep Blue, which was IBM's early brute force model of AI. And Dennett claimed at that time that Dreyfus had said that an AI would never beat a chess grandmaster, and isn't he refuted now? And Dreyfus pulled out his book and quoted the passage to show he'd never said that. And he said, I've been hearing you saying this for years now, Dennett. And in fact, here's what I said, which is that AIs will never be able to outperform humans in a non-closed system. But that if you have a closed system like chess, of course, eventually they get strong enough to be able to just brute force, see all the options, and then pick the optimal one. Self-driving cars are an interesting case because what Dreyfus said in there, if I'm recalling correctly, is that the old, what they call GoFi, or good old-fashioned AI, which was the early approach to AI that thought the way to make AI is to figure out what rules skillful humans are following and then program those rules into the AI. And if you get enough of the rules, pretty soon the AIs will be as good as us. And what Dreyfus showed was that's not how humans work. We don't follow rules. High-level human skill is operating beyond rules. It's about a sensitive response to the solicitations of the environment. And that picking up on the solicitations of the environment is about noticing what matters, what's significant. And that's the thing that computers have the hardest time doing. And if you go to the Google web pages and look at how complicated the algorithms that they're throwing at the data to try and figure out what the top search results should be, they've gone from the very simple results of just piggybacking on humans and like prioritizing the links that the most humans link to. That was the Google algorithm that started Google. To now being this incredibly complicated thing, including a few years ago, there was one, the acronym for which was BERT. And I'm pretty sure that was a little homage to Bert Dreyfus. So I think his view was that the only way you would get computers or AIs that could drive at anything approaching a human level would be to give them bodies and train them up like neural nets so that they're actually learning from a feedback response from their environment, which is in fact what's happened. Like the same deep learning algorithms that led to the breakthroughs in large language models are this, where the self-driving cars are using the same kinds of algorithms. And all of that is based on the model of a human brain as a neural network that's plastic, that is flexibly retrainable and learns through a complicated feedback loop with its environment to readjust its weighted connections to get better at performing certain tasks. And the deep language models that have, blown a lot of us away in their progress in the last 5 years or so, are based on a kind of simplified vision, what I call synthetic neuroplasticity. They're based on a simplified vision of a human brain, just reduced to a few layers instead of however many that we have going on. So it is interesting, and I would be very curious to hear what Bert would say today. I'm trying to anticipate some of it. I've got my own internal Bert Dreyfus voice, and I'm trying to pick up on that and respond in a way inspired by Heidegger, which is what Bert was doing, to the latest developments in this book. So
I was talking to Will, our cameraman, the other day. I was telling him about the perceptron, the kind of the first attempt at, or I think the first attempt at what gets called artificial intelligence now. And I was kind of telling them that, yeah, it's not new. Like all the flashy new technology, self-driving cars and LLMs and automation and all this stuff, it's not new. We've been working at it since the 1950s. And it's very frustrating for me to see everyone get captivated and think it's brand new and think the future's here. But the future is here, and we are living in this kind of pivotal moment. And I don't know, I'm asking a lot of questions right now concerning ethics and technology, and I think that's it. And I think we're at a point where these algorithms will be capable of making decisions that people label ethical decisions, but I think it'll never be, like, it necessarily won't be ethical because the algorithms don't have the relation to the symbolic and what's actually going on. But I want to read this book. I want to read the Heidegger and AI book. Yeah, I'm going to.
On that very well put question, thought, yeah, they're not new. As you say, they've been happening since at least the early 50s. And the whole time there's been the thought that, well, within 10 years, we're going to have truly intelligent computers that will be able to do all these miraculous things. And it's only very recently that that utopian or dystopian, depending on your perspective, sometimes both, hope has really reemerged and that's largely due to the deep learning advances. So the guy, Jeffrey Hinton, I think it is, who got the Turing Award in computer science along with two other people who were his collaborators in this. That's like the Nobel Prize in computer science, because there isn't a Nobel in computer science. And then last year he got the Nobel Prize in physics with other people for the application of it to science, where it's having incredible breakthroughs, right? But in the book I look at sort of why are people afraid or hopeful that this is going to become super intelligent and either save us from ourselves, somehow figure out responses to the problems that we can't figure out responses to, like global warming or peace in the Middle East or all this sort of thing, or realize that humans are the real problem on Earth and set about getting rid of us as quickly as possible. So what do we, and I go through that, and I end up arguing that there's not a lot of reason to really think that's going to happen. But there is good reason to be worried about the devastation of our way of life in a lot of specific fields. Basically anything that can be replaced by an AI will be. We're seeing that with Doge, right? Where people are coming in and let's destroy, they used to say deconstruct. Steve Bannon, who claims Heidegger is his guy, says they want to deconstruct the federal government, right? The deep state. They mean destroy, not deconstruct. Deconstruct means get rid of the intervening layers to recover the originary motivations and see paths not taken, other ways forward. This is just destroy. And for Heidegger, the technological understanding of being, the simplest way to think of it is it's this increasing dominance of an optimization imperative that says get the most for the least. That is, just be as efficient as possible. So get rid of all the human employees who are drawing down big salaries and taking health care and retirement benefits, replace them with, so they fired the whole Department of Education, or they're trying to fire the whole Department of Education, but not close the Department of Education, right? So, because they still need student loans and all this. So how can that happen? Well, the obvious response is AIs. They're going to put AIs in. So this is where I say Bert's lesson to his students was, the real danger of AIs is not that they're going to become much smarter than us and either save us or kill us. The real danger of AIs is that we're going to become as dumb as them and lower our expectations about ourselves and others to that level, and let that become the new future. So if you're in one of these many jobs, not just, it's white collar jobs now and people are getting worried about it, but it's been taxi drivers, soon it will be long-range truck drivers. Any jobs that can be replaced by automation will. And if you don't have the education or skill training or whatnot for an ability to go apply for some other job, this is bad. This is a devastation of your whole way of life. So I think for some people, the apocalypse is here or coming soon, to a channel near you. So although I don't think the AIs are going to become super intelligent creatures and start World War III. Some dumb humans that people have lowered their expectations enough to elect might. And then all bets are off.
Yeah, what you just said there about, humans being lowered to this standard, I think it's something that as university adjuncts, at a public university, just today, Dave was sitting and grading papers and reading these responses, and he was reading one out loud, and I go, that's AI. That's gotta be AI generated. But then we don't want to throw out an accusation, because some students are so programmed just to chug out this formulaic answer that it's like, well, it could also not be AI, but it basically sounds like AI. And so I think your approach was just, good job, but it sounds a little formulaic and AI-ish, because it's hard to be in that position of accusing someone when you're pretty sure, but you don't know exactly.
I was going to respond to that because that's great. Yeah, really, this is a bunch of issues that I'm on the AI committee here at this unnamed University of New Mexico, and my wife's the co-chair, and it's been very interesting. So a lot of people are like, how can we catch the student cheaters? Well, 30 years of doing this has me completely uninterested in being a cop. That's not the part of my job I care about. So only once have I ever turned anyone, maybe that I can remember. Maybe there's one other time, but turned anyone in for plagiarism, and it was when they turned in that Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy article to me. And I'm reading it thinking, wow, this is a long quote from me. They forgot the quotation marks. Where are they going to end? And it's just like 8 pages of me turned into me, because they never got to the bottom or had my name. So they're like, I found this thing on the internet that answers the question, and here it is, Thompson. And so I was like, well, if I say that that's not plagiarism, then I'm saying there's no meaningful. So that one I turned in. But in general, there's no, like, the legal teams don't have your back. So there's no foolproof way to prove plagiarism. So it's interesting. When I gave the first version of this, what became this book, it was at Franklin and Marshall University. A friend of mine, Stefan Koifer, teaches there. He's a really smart Heidegger scholar, and does Heideggerian logic, and knows a ton about math and logic. And he's I'm meeting his students, many of whom, this is an expensive liberal arts school, and many of his students are from other countries. English isn't their first language. And over dinner, I asked, what percentage of your students do you think use ChatGPT for, that was the main one then, or similar, for their writing? And he said, I don't know, maybe 10%. And I asked the students, and they're like 85%. Yeah. So I think, there is one of the things I end up concluding in this book is that optimistically, it looks like the large language models are going to get maybe about 70% as good as the best humans. But if your own writing's at 30, 40, 50%, or let alone 10, 20%, 70% looks really good. That's far above you. And for you to get good enough where you're looking down and can see that it's mediocre and speaks in these generic, boring terms, you've got to keep developing your skills. And that won't happen if you're letting the AI write for you. So there's a lot of things that need to be done to figure out ways to use this technology without being used by it. That is, to harness it so that we are aware of the problems it causes, and trying to use it in ways to avert or transcend those problems.
Yeah, I've got a student who came up to me after I gave one of the first week lectures, and he was like, "Hey, look, I was using AI." Because I was talking about everybody's first week stuff, and I was like, look, a lot of it was really good. Some of it was very obviously AI. I'm not going to call out anyone in here, but the fact is I could see it. And I also don't blame you, because I understand you're really busy. You got a lot of classes. You got to pick your battles. And you didn't feel this class out yet because you hadn't heard me talk. But I just want you to know, I want you to be serious. I want you to make the most of it. And it's not too late, and so he came and he was like, I was using AI, and he's like, I'm not going to do that anymore, but I want to show you what I was using. And so he showed me how he's not just plugging into ChatGPT. It also transcribes podcasts for him, takes notes, and then he'll sit there, and it's a little bit more like what Will's do. I would say what you do is a lot more advanced than what he was doing, but he's trying to do basically what you're doing, right? And so maybe you'll say something about what you do think it's good for and how you do use it. Yeah, because that would be good, I think.
Yeah, so I mainly use AI as kind of like an editor, like a very, very first editor, because I used to use kind of stuff that was like called Pro Writing Aid and Grammarly and stuff like that just catches kind of sentences that don't make sense and things like that. And so it's kind of good as like a first editor. And just kind of like a first eye over it. But I mean, I think there's a certain way in which it can kind of teach you a little bit what good writing is and bad writing is. But I think I kind of mirror your point of once you're kind of a good enough writer, you realize how bad it is, and also how boring it is. It can't really surprise you or do anything like that. So that's why it's better as kind of a sense check, grammar check, I think, is kind of a good way to use it.
Yeah, super interesting. And I think, the future is being written and still to be written in these areas. So I think in the case of student writing with AI, it's going to increasingly need to be these creative ways of using it to be collaborative and help you do drafts and show you, point out some obvious mistakes I'm making so that I can respond to them before my teacher just points them out and that kind of thing. Not just plugging in the prompt and turning in the output as your own, but that simplest way of using it, which was, some initial responses when it first started being available, were doing that. I think that's applying this optimization imperative of getting the most for the least to yourself, and specifically to your own education. Like if the whole point of our realities is get the most for the least, then education becomes one more thing where you're just thinking, how can I make the most money? What degree will get me the most money in the world, and how can I get that degree while doing the least amount of work? That's rational. The person who doesn't do that is failing to be as rational and efficient as possible. They're going to get downsized by Doge, right? They're not. So I think instead what we need to do is, what philosophers of education like myself need to do, is point out that that's not what education is. Education is not about getting the most for the least. It's about, since Plato, you've heard of the allegory of the cave. That's, as Plato says in the Republic, the allegory of the cave is an allegory that's supposed to illustrate the effect of education on the human self, how it transforms the self. And all the way through the modern university, which is formed in early 1800s in Germany, is about how we integrate research and teaching. So how we can teach and be doing cutting edge research at the same time, and how we'll maintain the unity of the university when research takes us off into a million different directions. So what I say is the Bildung ideal, which is the German ideal of that motivated the foundations of the modern university, is about learning to identify your own strengths and talents and cultivate and develop those in a way that lets you address the issues in the world that matter most to you. Because it's a combination of you developing what you're good at and being able to speak to what you care about in the world that allows you to have a meaningful life. It's not about maximizing the ducats in your bank account, as we can see from these near trillionaires who are will never be satisfied. There's no amount of money that they'll be good, I'm done, right? In fact, I was teaching Nietzsche earlier today, and he makes this point that even the most powerful people will keep taking risks. They don't need to do it, but they're driven by something. And that drive is not about just sheer optimization, I don't think. I mean, Nietzsche might beg to differ. For him, it's about will to power. But yeah, I think Heidegger's critique of technology is that the will to power ideal has become so ubiquitous in our society that it's hard for us to imagine any alternative to that. So I spend a lot of time trying to motivate that idea.
Right. That sounds like the nice little segue point here into Timenergy, actually, because we're talking about education and this vision for an educated civilization. And our goal, in part, is to get people thinking about how there's a lot of stuff you can't buy in terms of commodities and capitalism. There's a lot of things you can't buy, and they require large energy-infused, repeatable blocks of time reliably available in your society. If you don't have large energy-infused, repeatable blocks of time reliably available in your society, then you can't do things with people, and you definitely can't learn the violin or a bunch of different languages, right? You definitely don't have skole. And so, skole. Maybe there's a better way to pronounce that, but yeah. The root of school, right? Which means leisure time, active leisure time, or otium, right? That would be the way that Nietzsche talks about as otium. No, not pocket chew. No, yeah, skull. Yeah. No. Yeah. Nance, everywhere we go, he's got to find that right there. That he's got the tobacco. But Timenergy's this thing, or it's not really a thing, but it's
what is Timenergy?
Right. So that's the large energy infused repeatable blocks of time reliably available in a society. That's the definition. And it's what you have before time gets fractured from energy, and everything becomes compartmentalized, and everything's being counted by the minute, and everything's this treadmill of now this, and all time becomes equalized in this sort of spatial metaphor through capitalism, clocks and calendars, and constantly trying to follow that optimization imperative. Timenergy is something that societies have, relatively speaking. Different ones have more of it. And then in a heavily classed or caste kind of a system, some people have all of it and other people are reduced to labor power for necessary labor, right? They address the needs of society. And so, what would be a truly free or progressive society? It'd be one where people are able to build relationships with each other and actually, here's the T3 institution part: discover talents, cultivate those under tutelage, and do so with time energy. Like you need the time energy to discover and also then cultivate those talents. And so that's what we call T3 or T cubed institutions, the kind of institutions that could say, hey, you're free. Here you go. You find your talents, cultivate them, find the tutors that you want to cultivate them under. That's the basic idea.
Shall we drill down on this a little? Yeah. Sweet. So, as you know, and some other people might not, Heidegger's critique of technology, what he calls enframing, is grounded in his understanding of metaphysics. So for him, metaphysics isn't just this abstract of philosophers in their ivory towers. Rather, it's the history that we are. It provides like the most basic concepts that we use to structure how we make sense of ourselves in the world, our sense of what is and what matters. And it's so fundamental, it becomes like water to the fish. We swim in it, we don't see it. So I'm interested in thinking about how time energy might be a way of enframing, transcending itself from within. That's my hope, is that it's a path beyond the nihilism of the technological world. So here's the Heidegger way of thinking about it, at least as I understand. So for Heidegger, the metaphysics that turns us into enframers or technological thinkers who are always optimizing, trying to get the most released, is a metaphysics, or what he calls an onto-theology, of eternally recurring will to power, which basically means that we think reality is fundamentally composed of nothing but force striving against force, with no goal beyond the maximum perpetuation of force itself. And that as we relate to all things like that, including ourselves, we turn everything into what he calls Bestand, or which was standing reserve, or meaningless resources standing by to be optimized. So part of that is we treat everything as meaningless stuff to just be efficiently optimized, get the most released. Another part of it that Mark Rathal's emphasized is that we try to get it on standby to make it reliable. It's like, do we have that? We're out of it on the floor. Do we have it in the back room? You know, we want it there so it's ready whenever we need it. So the way you were describing time energy set off that bell. And I want to know, is there a way of thinking about time energy where it isn't just reducing, like quantifying the qualitative, turning like conversations with human beings into energetics or something, but having a appreciation for maybe something like the texture of situations and places and events, such that we learn to respond to them in a way that isn't just quantifying, but picks up on qualities that can't be just quantified. I don't know if you've thought about that at all. That's my Heidegger question for you.
I think maybe I do get this from Heidegger somewhat, is I don't think about time as like a universal thing where it's the same everywhere. And I'm not just talking, Einstein's relativity. No, I'm thinking like different people are going different speeds, different cultures are going different speeds. And that doesn't mean like forward in some linear progression or backwards or whatever, but like, no, there's a tempo and pace of life. Temporality. And if you come through like a conquistador who's just looking for the thing that you're enframed to pursue, and everyone else is kind of, I don't know, like let's just use Mexico as an example. We were in Albuquerque Aguascalientes for 6 months back in 2023, and it was really nice. And we started calling it plaza culture. They just, like kind of like over here, but it'd be a gazebo in the middle, and then there's just families, and it's intergenerational. It's very obvious. You have like 100 people, and they're just there for like 7 hours.
Ice cream and buying street tacos for a handful of pesos.
Maybe skateboarding, roller skating, or playing music.
Yeah,
but
and their relation to leisure activities. Like if you say, hey, we're hosting a party. It starts at 6. They won't show up till at the earliest like 6:30 because it's personal time. Yeah. There's no rush. I can come whenever I want. It's leisure.
Yeah, and so different people, different speeds, and we can think about the cultural fabric somehow having something to do with like it's almost like if you're in a band and you have like someone keeping the tempo, and it's the metronome. It's like different cultures have their different speeds, and Capital just says no, no, everything needs to be delivered overnight. We need it preferably immediately. So, and that is exactly like the standby effect. The one thing I'll say about it is the way I say it, Timenergy is just this given, but then it is taken by Capital in the reduction of Timenergy to labor power. So it's reduced to labor power. The large, that's relative to humans. So let's just say 5 to 7 hours. Large, energy infused, repeatable blocks of time reliably available in your society, between people, in a week, every week. Yeah.
So something that resists just the ADHDification of all temporality too. That's interesting. So part of me wants to call it temporality instead of time, just because, I mean, time is catchier, but in Being and Time, Heidegger's most famous book, um, being and time is a name for an intersection, not a list, right? So being enters into time and time enters into being. So being enters into time and unfolds. That's our lives. That's history. That's like things not being glued together, but coming apart and happening as chunks, or however you want to think about it. And then there's time coming into being and becoming intelligible as something we can think about, where there's ages and epochs and this sort of thing. So there's like the constant, as you mentioned Einstein, right, where time becomes some sort of mathematical measure that we just presuppose. But then there's how we experience time, how we make sense of time, and that's temporality. And so I think that's what Heidegger's interested in. If you say, well, Heidegger, my experience of temporality is that it slows down and speeds up. Like when I'm really having a good time, it goes really fast. And when I'm really bored, it goes really slow. But that's just subjective bias, because we all know temporality, time moves at a steady, uniform clip. That's not true, right? Like temporality really does slow down and speed up. And guess what? That's true of a lifetime too. Your childhood goes much slower, and the older you get, the faster time goes, right? So this is not, it might be worth drawing a footnote that, on time versus temporalization, but I also want to hear more about energy.
Yeah, and so the main way I talk about energy, there's a major bifurcation, and that would be between an energy that is sort of, as you say, ADHDified or something. It's very frenetic. It's all over the place, and it's what happens when you put somebody under extreme stress and they're anxious and it's like, get to work, get to it, I gotta do this, or you're gonna get in trouble, so they it's schooled into us, and some people in the schooling system do okay with that. Other people really, it chews them up and spits them out, and so there's that kind of energy. But then there's also a kind of energy that's cool, calm, and collected.
Gelassenheit, we call it.
Gelassenheit, yeah. And so I'm really interested in that. I'm also really interested in different kinds of energy. So there's physical, creative, intellectual, emotional, social, and I think Jung was aware of those basics, and actually those basics fit into, I think, the 16 personalities thing that eventually came from his work. But then for me, extroverted, introverted, comes from the idea of social energy. And then you have all these other kinds of personality types that are based in the kinds of energies that you relate to more or something. So I'm interested in that. I'm also interested in pragma and philia and all these other kinds of these energies from ancient Greek. And then libidinal energy is also going to be really important, right? So psychoanalysts often are the ones who think the most about energy in a certain way, but for them, it's all libido. It's all, it's a sex metaphor, we could say, something like that. But there is something really good that has come out of my time learning especially Lacanian psychoanalysis from Mikey, and that is, and from Todd McGowan. But that is drive versus desire, and the two are like on this, what kind of strip is a Mobius strip, right? But I also think of it kind of like a rubber band. There's like a sort of tension between drive and desire, and drive drive is that thing that, it's that undermining, right? And we could think of the kind of productive procrastination that, especially in academia, we learn to do, right? Because you have a million things, but then you get really good at doing things up against deadlines. And so it all becomes a matter of like delaying and procrastinating productively because you're doing these other things up against these deadlines. And that's a kind of like supercharged libidinal time. It's very wrapped up in drive. Obviously, most people aren't very good at it, that they don't do so well in academia. But for those of us who are good at it, it's actually kind of addicting or satisfying. But energy time is what I call that. So I flip it. Instead of time energy, this is like energy time. It's something where you've gone through the time energy shredder. You've been optimized as a kind of labor power commodity. And now you're self-optimizing your drive up against these deadlines in this kind of wild way, right? But not everyone's so good at it, right? And so we have to be kind of aware that this is like a thing for us. Yeah.
So for me, it's important. You said so much that I'd love to respond to, but I'll just be brief.
I don't want to talk about energy.
Energy, yeah. Well, for me, it's important that when you're figuring out what you're good at and developing that, you're not optimizing. So, or when you're up against a deadline and you've shredded all your normal sense of self, and now like you've got this intense feeling of really putting everything into what you're doing, that's not optimizing, even if you've been put through the optimization machine. Why not? Because optimization is empty quantification that reduces everything to the lowest common denominator. And this is where Heidegger's critique of values comes in. He thinks like when we think about what matters as values, we're quantifying, and you can't quantify the qualitative. There's this story about like who's Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill's sitting next to a woman. It's a sexist story, sorry, but you've spent a lot of time with Žižek. I won't bother. He's sitting next to a woman at a cocktail party, and he says, "Madam, would you sleep with me for £1 million?" And she says, "Yes." And he says, "Well, how about for £1?" And she says, "What do you think I am?" And he says, "Well, madam, we've established that already, and now we're just dickering over the price." So that idea, like that if somebody says, "I'll give you $5 million to torture your mom or your kid or your cat or something," it's not that they haven't offered you enough money. It's that's not a quantifiable thing. That's the kind of thing that matters to you, that you build a life around, right? That is not so. For me, I think it's important to think about things that resist getting technologized. And to preserve and cultivate those things. So that's why I want to think about like texture in the energy, or like fields or something. I don't know how to think about it, but that doesn't quantify it. I also want to talk about the dead in deadlines and the shadow self in the Jungian, which I'm teaching Zarathustra for like the 4th time, where we just read through it slowly. And there's this line where Jung did 10 years, I think, of lectures on Zarathustra, and then that influenced Joseph Campbell, who influenced George Lucas. So there's this long line of kind of the absorption of Nietzsche's thoughts into mainstream American culture. And I'm interested now, rereading this semester, on the Nietzsche. Zarathustra's shadow is always like flying off ahead of him and doing stuff he doesn't want it to do. And I think the thought of the shadow is, for Nietzsche at least, that it's you glimpsing your future self, but a future self that you can only become by allowing the self that you are now to die. So it's a future self that, for you to be that, who you are now has to die so you can be reborn as that. So to the self you are now, your shadow's terrifying, because it's the death of the self you are now, and the ego clings to who it is and likes to be in control and doesn't like the idea of giving up what it knows to enter into the partly unknown, even if the partly unknown is more desirable and better for it and will be experienced as more meaningful and happier. And that's death, by the way. That dying and being reborn is what Heidegger means by death. And he distinguishes that from demise, which is what death means in the literal sense that we normally use it.
Well, that's a perfect segue on our way away from time energy, then I'll just say
Can we ever
the
get away from
I know we can never get away from it. Shadow, the the finitude of time though is a really important part of it, right? This is our only life that we know of for sure, and our time is precious, and everyone says that. And then of course Benjamin Franklin, he says that the stop it, don't call me. Hold on, let me make the phone stop doing that. Yeah, sorry about that. I didn't know my phone could make noises. Anyway,
Yeah.
Very pretty.
yeah. Yeah, it's a brand new phone, so I haven't.
Dave hasn't had a phone for like the last 3 weeks because it broke at the end of February and just got that. We're still getting used to Dave having a phone.
Let's give me back agency here, and I'll say I broke my phone. I was so sick of my phone, I smashed it. I haven't done that in like 8 years, but I just think every once in a while, free yourself from it, however you have to, you know. And it was a huge inconvenience, but I was really over it, and I felt so good without a phone. But
Was it hard to break?
it, no, I didn't. I mean, I didn't realize it would break as much as it did. I thought it would crack. I did. It got smashed. But finitude,
Finitude of time.
finitude of time, finitude of energy, and of course, you know, scarcity is the basis of economics. So there's some kind of a connection there. Ah, that's Ben Franklin, right? Time is money. Time is money. He says that, and you know, of course, Weber has a heyday with the things that Franklin had to say about time and money and capitalism. And so, thinking about that though, I just kind of want to dig deeper into death and finitude. And I don't know that Anne's really heard that much of it. Maybe you saw the little 4 to 5 minute video I made from an interview.
Yes, I did see that. I've seen
Is
that.
that still up? Because that was
Yeah.
really cool.
I think it might be up right now. It might be available. Yeah. At one point I when I was changing everything, I just unlisted everything, but I've been slowly releasing stuff again from back in the day. Yeah, that one was one of my favorites. And basically in it, you said that death should be thought of not as demise. You know, in Heidegger, it's not demise, which is the body. No, we're talking about existential world collapse. But here in the introduction of your book, you were saying that you were wrong about. You said that even you have conflated death and demise too much, and I was like, well, I didn't know that because I feel like you've always been good on this, so you've become more critical or
Before you met.
rigorous. Yeah.
We have to get the time straight. So last century I was confused,
Okay. Okay.
as almost everybody still is. Namely, I thought that when Heidegger was talking about death, he meant what we all mean by death, but he does not. He means existential death, which is like dying and being reborn. So the finitude of temporality is a good way in, because a lot of people think by the finitude of temporality he means like you only have so much time. Wake up, kid.
YOLO.
Yeah, YOLO. And I grew up in Yolo County and in California, and that's not what he means. So the finitude of temporality is a very weird thought that's, I don't know how many people have understood it, and once they do, if they'll agree with it or not. But it's this thought that so the transition between the first two parts of being in time, which is all he ever wrote, the division 1 and division 2, he's trying to he asks the question, we've gone through the 3 existential structures, and then you've got time energy as another existential structure, but we go through the 3 main existential structures, which are Reda, which is like our conversance with things, Verstehen, our understanding, which is like we project ourselves into projects in terms of, and Befindlichkeit, exactly, mood and mood energy and all that, mooded attunement to the world. So, and then those 3 are going to end up being grounded in these 3 temporal structures, where our moods are where our past still is affecting how the world shows up for us, and the Reda is the way like things become present to us. We gear into chairs and we walk on grass, and we have all, and Verstehen is our future. That's the projects in terms of which we understand ourselves that helps organize the intelligible worlds that we are as Dasein, or being here, the place where being takes place, right? So instead of just a cacophony of possibilities, we experience, teacher or whatever it is. Like we have a project that makes sense of ourselves. But it can happen, unfortunately, that those projects can collapse. And when those projects collapse, we don't croak. We don't cease to exist. We exist as what he calls a solus ipse, or self alone. And Derrida's last book is about, his last lectures are about this. He reads Existential Death in terms of Robinson Crusoe and a kind of shipwreck. So it's like the shipwreck of our life projects leaves us still here. We survive the shipwreck of what we normally think of as ourselves, which in existential terms is just like the clothing of the world. We're still here, but without that, all this positive stuff that normally, I'm a husband, I'm a father, that's all gone. I can still make sense of the world intellectually, but I'm not connected to it. It doesn't matter to me. And this is early Heidegger. And in that experience where I still am, but I have no future projects that would make my intelligible world reach out into a intelligible domain that I can't see coming, that's the finitude of temporality. So temporality itself becomes finite. And it's something for Heidegger, it's like the most primordial, or Sprungliche, like the deepest kind of finitude you can ever experience. He says, like, more essential than Dasein is the essentiality of the finitude within it. So this idea is that finite, he calls it existiert endlich, like that's death. In death, it's not that existence is ended, but we are at an end. Our existence is at an end. We're not able to be teacher, father, son. We are here, but can't make sense of ourselves in terms of any of that worldly stuff. And in that moment, it's like our whole world becomes, he calls it durchsichtig, like transparent, or I can see all myself because I'm fully there. I'm not stretching out into this future. And the past that I was thrown out of is not helping me. It's not like allowing me to find a way forward. So in that moment, my past and my future are closed to me, and I am this inability to go on. I have to, but I can't. And that experience, that's the possibility of an impossibility, or death. That possibility for him is it's embodied. So I'm projecting. So I project into not being able to project into. That's death. And in that moment, that's the radical finitude of temporality. So all the further thoughts about, well, life is limited, you only have so many days, I could croak right now, all of that comes from and presupposes this more originary sense of existential temporal finitude.
So you said something in this, which I thought was your newest book, but no, now you have another new. I can't keep up with you, Iain. But yeah, hey, yeah, hey, this guy just rode through the quad with his bike, bumping some music. Oh, you brought your books, fantastic. Okay, this one's a little bit more my size. I could deal with this one.
That's one chapter. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you said something in Rethinking Death in and after Heidegger here. Let's see if I can remember it. Yeah. So you said, I think something about Heidegger's thinking on death specifically relates to why he abandoned the project of fundamental ontology. And then I'll say what that means to me and why I care about it. And then you can tell me if I'm right about what it means. But I think fundamental ontology is basically his way of saying, oh, all this ontology philosophers doing. Well, they're not really doing fundamental ontology, because to do that, they'd have to start out reflexively, which is to say, who's asking the questions? We're going to actually have to start with the human. We can't start with stars and God and angels. We have to start with the person asking the question, because, well, the one who asks the question, there's something unique about that kind of being, isn't there? And so that's what I love about being in time. I love the fundamental ontology piece of it. And so,
what's the fundamental ontology piece?
So why does he abandon it, and what does death have to do with that?
Okay. I thought you were about to tell me everything you said's right. It's just you didn't get to fundamental ontology yet. So you pointed out that in order to do fundamental ontology, we have to ask the question of our own, who's the doer here, right? And that's Dasein. So among all the entities, all the things that in any way are, we are privileged in that we're the being whose being is a question for it. We ask what's it mean to be me? Am I a good dad? Am I a good teacher? The cat's not asking, am I a good cat? Maybe it is. And Heidegger's very anthropocentric, and this is one of Derrida's critiques of Heidegger. So it's a problem.
Derrida was a cat guy.
Yeah, and Heidegger's a dog guy. But he defines fundamental ontology and being in time as the attempt to answer the question of the meaning of being in general. So not just what is the earth and what is the sky and what are the gods and what is beauty and all that, but what does every use of is have in common? What's it mean to be anything at all? That's the being pie. So don't do a specific positive science like biology. That's just the science of living things. Psychology, that's the science of conscious things. History, that's the science of historical things. We're going to look at things as things, entities as entities. That's being. And he's going to answer that question. So being in time is incredibly ambitious. It says, I'm going to answer the question that all philosophy has asked, that's been forgotten and never answered. What's it mean to be anything at all? And that, if he can do that, then he will have redeemed the project of metaphysics. That's ontology. And what he realizes instead is that as he begins to deconstruct the history of metaphysics and starts paying a little more attention to poetry, is that I tell the story in this piece on Heidegger's Nazism, where I think it's around mid-30s, he encounters a tree that's changing colors. I think it's fall and it's turned red. And he looks at this tree and he just thinks, the idea that there's one thing that tree means, that you could reduce its being down to something you could express or explain, is hopeless. That tree, the being of that tree is so rich and polysemic, multiple meaninged, that the idea that it could be expressed as a einer, a single meaning of being, is hopeless. And in fact, as he deconstructs the tradition, what he gets back to is this Greek vision of what being meant for the Greeks. And I argue this in the first book, but he comes to recognize that view is not the kind of thing that a philosopher can recapture and then use to unify the university, because in fact, his project as the rector of Freiburg University is directly connected to his metaphysical ambition to deliver a fundamental ontology. Because if he can explain what it means to be anything at all, then as the Führer rector, the leader of the university, he can explain what unifies the university and reunify it. And he can't do it. He's struggling. He's been on that path since 1909, I think, when this guy Conrad Gruber, who was the archbishop of his little private Catholic school he was living in, said, "Oh, you're the smartest kid here at the private school for poor Catholic kids, and here's this book. Here's the book I could never crack. It's on the manifold meaning of being in Aristotle by Franz Brentano. Crack this code. What does being mean, basically?" So he's been trying to figure that out since at least 1909 to 1927, where Being Time says it's going to do it and then breaks off without doing it. It doesn't do it, right? It says all the work in Being Time is propedeutic or preparatory to explaining what the meaning of being is. He comes as close as he ever gets in Kant and the Problem of Metaphysics, but there too he breaks off, so he doesn't do it. And my view is that instead of thinking that there is some meaning of being that can be recovered from beneath history after you deconstruct it, he instead sees that the university is already unified, and it's not the salvation to the endless spreading out and fragmentation of the university. Instead, it's a problem, because what's unifying the university is this nihilistic understanding of being, which he'll come to call enframing. That we're increasingly understanding all things as meaningless stuff waiting to be optimized, and that view of what it means to be a thing is getting carried out in history and physics and biology and English. Everyone's taking that over without noticing they're doing it, and that's reinforcing this vision of what things are and what we are that makes life feel less meaningful to us, and hence is leading us into this growing existential state of nihilism, where we get all this, people think nothing matters, so who cares? Do whatever you want, fire everybody, get the computer to do it. It doesn't feel bad sending out the pink slips by email because it has no feeling, so that's more efficient than a human having to. If the Nazis would have had AI technology, they would have gotten further in this. It's kind of terrifying. So later Heidegger dedicates himself to transcending the very thing that early Heidegger was dedicated to redeeming. So Heidegger has to die to the central project that's been organizing his life from 1909 to about 1936-ish. The 30s are a kind of backsliding period, but he has to, and then later Heidegger is the attempt to think what it would mean to do philosophy without falling back into metaphysics, where metaphysics is the attempt to make everything fit into a singular framework of meaning. What will it mean to be open to the truth that there is no one framework that can capture the intelligibility of things? How do we think that? What kind of ethics and politics and literature and education do we need in light of that truth?
And then that's Is it so within framing and this being the unifier for the university, it seems like that would probably tie back to onto-theology. And I was thinking I've got a few things that would be worth unpacking briefly. And let's get into that. It's a confusing term for sure. What is onto-theology for Heidegger?
Okay, so the simple answer, I'll give you that, and then you can ask me to expand if you want. The simple answer is think of all reality as a beach ball. Onto-theology is the attempt to grasp the beach ball from the outside in and the inside out at the same time. The outside in, that's the God's eye view from nowhere. That's the theo. The inside out, that's like find me the tiniest little bit of stuff everything else is made out of, whether that's subatomic particles or superstrings or whatever it is. That's ontology. So, and it starts, I argue, with Thales and Anaximander. Thales is the first one to say reality is all made of the same stuff, water. Anaximander is the same one to say it all comes from the infinite and returns to that when it ceases to be discrete stuff. And then Plato takes those two views together. So Heidegger calls him the first metaphysician. That means the first onto-theologist, because for Plato, the forms are both what explain what everything has in common and the ultimate highest expressions of things. Like the form of beauty is both what all the different beautiful things participate in and the most beautiful of all the beautiful things you could ever possibly encounter. And then that onto-theological structure, that's the framework of all metaphysics all the way through Nietzsche, for whom Heidegger thinks, Nietzsche wouldn't agree, but Heidegger thinks Nietzsche has an unthought metaphysics where for Nietzsche, the ontology is will to power and the theology is eternal recurrence. And so we, all of us are Nietzscheans, even the person driving around with their bumper sticker that says Nietzsche's dead, God. They're still trying to optimize their message spreading with their car bumper, they're still, that's Nietzschean. So for Heidegger, the problem is we're all Nietzschean and we need to find embrace the truth of that. God is dead. There's no way to get to the metaphysical and secure this reality within it anymore. But that doesn't mean that there's no being. For Nietzsche, being gets dissolved into becoming, and it's an illusion. Like you might think there's a table here, or this, what'd you call this thing?
Power podium.
The power, that's kind of Nietzsche. The power podium, you might think there's a power podium here, but there's not. There's just power. There's just will to power. There's just forces coming together and breaking apart. And if you could see from the perspective of the universe, you wouldn't think there was a thing there, right? So Heidegger's trying to say Nietzsche's right to pick up on the dynamism of becoming, that things come into and pass out of being. And when we're under the influence of Plato and the metaphysics of presence, we think only what's permanent is real. And that's not true. Things that are temporary can be very real. But for Heidegger, Nietzsche doesn't see like the reality of the temporary. Things can, like you can fall in love or have a week's experience that's profoundly meaningful to you. And the fact that it doesn't last forever doesn't mean it's not real. So he's trying to do justice to both. This is the later thought of the truth event, which people like Badiou pick up on. And I talk a lot about in the art book, because for him, that's a paradigm of like something profoundly meaningful that we humans can still have. So for example, you fall in love, something happens, it's too big for you to fully understand at the time. But insofar as you stay, Badiou develops a lot of this, insofar as you stay faithful or committed to unfolding the significance of that event, it gives your life an unfolding identity. So your identity as a person through time becomes wrapped up in and partly defined by what that event comes to mean for you in your life.
Yeah, it's like a quilting point, or like a basis, for you that, and in being in time, he kind of talks about it as resoluteness, right?
Yeah, I don't understand the Lacanian thing because sorry, I'm not trying to be obnoxious. I just genuinely don't understand. So in Freud, the navel of the dream is like the moment where you can't interpret the dream, and you can't interpret it not because you're like, I don't know what that tree meant in my dream. I understand everything else, but I can't understand what the tree meant in my dream because it means my dad and my mom and my brother and my job and like everything. It means too much. So somehow the quilting point is like the Lacanian translation of the navel of the dream, right? It's where like you hit reality, but like it's a severed wound that's like it leaves a mark, right? So my sense is that for the Lacanian, every symbolic system is illusory in some way. Like they're built on a kind of foundational repression or denial that the analyst has to figure out to set off this world collapse that can let you out of that identity and into a more meaningful identity. This is my Heideggerian way to try and understand Lacan. If that's right, then what is problematic about that for me is that for Heidegger, an identity can be meaningful. You can have a meaningful identity. It's not every identity is just a kind of wounded trauma response, although all identities are wounded and in response to trauma in part. They're not all hopelessly meaningless. And maybe Lacan didn't think they were, and he just was talking about the kind of people who would pay a lot of money to go into therapy to get there. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, I mainly mean that's all fascinating, and I'm not sure if it directly relates or not. But the way I think about quilting point and the way that Mike usually like unpacks it, if you think about meaning being this thing that slips, right, and that to define a word you have to use other words, and then you have to use other words, and it becomes this infinite regress. A master signifier, it becomes this quilting point by being sort of where the buck stops. Right, so God's the answer. God's the answer. God's the answer. Or science is the answer. Science is the answer. Science. It'll become like this thing that answers all of the other things. And there's also practically what the quilting point was in the clinic. We don't have to get into it. That has to do with his variable length sessions that were so controversial and whatnot. But I was mainly thinking about, this fidelity to the event and resoluteness. And
Can I just say one thing on what you said before?
running out into being just committed to something. Yeah.
So just before you go on to that second point, which sounds fascinating, so for Lacan, then every master signifier is a kind of theology in the onto-theology sense, right? It's like you postulating a transcendent that stops all the questions. So, yeah. Okay. So I think this is the difference between Heidegger and Derrida. My other seminar I'm teaching right now is Derrida. And so Derrida calls Heidegger's notion of being the myth of the transcendental signified. So like tree, that's the signifier. And the naive view is that the word tree gets its meaning in part by its relation to the tree, the signified. Well, for Derrida, that's not true. Trees don't get their meaning from the extra linguistic thing you're pointing to. They get their meaning from all the things they're different from, and from like the way they stretch from past into future. The past future thing, that's very Heidegger. But the different thing is that's his Derrida's Saussureanism, which I think Lacan maybe shares. And for Heidegger, that's a problem because there's this thing here, reality. So Heidegger's a phenomenologist who's trying to do justice to how we experience the world. And if you end up saying, well, all worlds are illusory, or, like reaction formations against a terrifying reality that can't be put into words, then for Heidegger, you're in like Buddhism land, or you're in a view that is sort of saddled with claiming that your whole world is systematically delusory. And that's, I think maybe we want to say that everyone's just in false consciousness and we're all in a computer simulation or something, but I don't think Heidegger believes any of that stuff. I think he's kind of got a more commonsensical view, and that's part of what I like about it. It sounds really wild and stuff, but he's describing things that when you get a sense of the phenomenon he's describing, make sense. And so they don't, I won't say the rest of that, but yeah.
Well, as far as meaning goes, I definitely like the Division 1 approach, from being in time more than I get more traction from it than Saussure, right? Words are assignments in order to do something, right? And there's an ultimate for the sake of which, or if there might not be an ultimate one, but there's at least for the sake of which is really just goals or ends for Aristotle, right? It's an
there
end.
There has to be an ultimate one for there to be death. So this is an interesting fact of Heidegger's view, is that there has to be an ultimate for the sake of which in order for you to go through accidental death. Because if you're like a late modern self who's like got a bunch of identities, and if one collapses, well, that's okay, I've got these other ones, then you're never going to have a complete world collapse. So you're never going to experience that finite temporality that he's talking about. Whereas if everything you do is in a kind of a teleological or nested structure, like it's all serving this big goal of yours that's really the way you understand your identity, and that collapses. Like, I'm just trying to figure out what it means to be, and then you give up on the idea of being able to answer that question, then all the other stuff, being a teacher, being a husband, being a father, that all just crumbles away. And that's existential death. So I think you can think about what existential death means by generalizing from the breakdown of like the death of any one project, and we've all lived through that, like the death of a person or a pet or sorry kitty, I hope you live forever. But the we know what that's like, but it's pretty rare, I think, for to have like a radical identity collapse, or it's like more anxiety attack or panic attack where your whole life collapses, at least temporarily, is what Heidegger's describing. So, and you need that for being in time. Like, so this is where phenomenology, the thing I was saying a minute ago, it's so commonsensical. This is the rejoinder to that is, he says, phenomenologically, the idea that you have to undergo existential death to be able to say whether his analysis of it is convincing or not is a pretty high bar. So all your students have to like take ayahuasca or something. What are you saying? Like, or go have a panic attack or a collapse of the self. I think, if you, to evaluate that specific claim, you have to live through it. And he says, from the ordinary perspective, this is a Zumutung, like it gets translated as a fantastically unreasonable demand. And that's like when God says to Abraham, sacrifice your son. That's a fantastically unreasonable demand, because God's promised Abraham that his descendants will be infinite, as plentiful as the grains of sand on the beach and the stars in the sky. And now Abraham's in his 80s, and God's telling him to kill his only son, who has no kids. He's a little kid. So how am I going to have infinite descendants when you're making me kill my only descendant? Right? It doesn't make sense. It's not rational. It's not reasonable. Similarly, from the perspective of like, I'm trying to get good grades so I can become a doctor, the idea that you have to go through a collapse of all your projects to see whether what Heidegger's describing as existential death is good phenomenology is fantastically unreasonable. Nonetheless, he is saying that. Yeah.
So I kind of want to, as we move towards a close, ask a couple.
Maybe we need Lacanian psychoanalysis.
Yeah, we'll do the variable thing session. It's over. There we go. That was the point. No, I've got a question I'm dying to ask you, but maybe I should jump to it.
Existential death.
Oh, to have existential death. Well, what this brings up for us. So Ernst Junger, is that how you say it? Ernst Junger, and his Storm of Steel. I think you actually mentioned that when I visited long time ago here, when you were giving a presentation on Heidegger and Arendt. You talked about his infatuation with the Storm of Steel and sort of like this, and you referred to Junger as like the John Wayne of World War I, and basically this
the real one,
you know
the actor.
Yeah. Well, they lost so much.
This is the guy. Who's the guy? There's a real guy like this. Sorry, there's some real American guy like this who's in all these wars and he made movies. Oh man, I forget. They're like New York Times bestsellers, but he's the kind of Ernst Junger figure, like a front lines guy who, gets all these military honors and has that kind. So John Wayne's just acting, right? Yeah.
But Junger was the real deal, right? And so, for guys like Junger and Heidegger, the loss of World War I shaped their consciousness for the rest of their lives, and they can be thought of as a sort of response to the loss and shock of trench warfare, first round, right? Because that was traumatic for everyone who was involved. And in that sense, I think some people read Heidegger's thoughts on death through that lens, thinking about the fact that he wants to equip the next generation of German soldiers with a different way of thinking that will hopefully help them win or whatever. And I'm just curious how much that is there, you said, in your work. And then also maybe you could say a few words about his Nazism, because that has come up. And I think that's anyone who's never really heard about him before is going to be like, you mentioned that, but maybe you could unpack that a little. Maybe why are you reading this guy so much? And I would just say, my impression of you, as well as this place, it's very liberal. You're very liberal. And so the fact that you are a Heidegger scholar is something people will be like, what? So,
Yeah. Yeah, a bunch of questions there. So, okay, I'll come back to Nazi stuff. Remind me. But Ernst Jünger never became a Nazi, interestingly, despite the Nazi Party trying to get him because he was the great war hero of World War One. So, World War One, all the different philosophers were competing to explain why Germany was destined to win. Husserl, all these guys are writing stuff about the Germans are the people of Innerlichkeit. That's like intense inner experience. They're like they got the most intense inner lives. That's why they deserve to win this Nietzschean battle. The earth has like a globe for the dominance between different folk, different peoples and their languages and the way their languages preserve a way of being. That's whole, yeah, yeah. Husserl and Shaler, all these people are that we think of as good guys are apologists for nationalism in its most militaristic forms. And Heidegger comes of age at that time. He usually manages to get. He's got like a tendency to have psychosomatic heart attacks. That's his first experience of existential death is when he's about to take his vows to become a Jesuit. And the night before, he realizes he's going to have to spend the rest of his life foregoing sex, which was not a Heidegger thing to do, and and dedicating his mind to defending the Pope, which he later describes as like taking out your skull, scooping out your brains, and filling it with spaghetti. You know, he has instead of admitting to himself that this thing his mom's wanted him to do, his priest, everyone who said you're so smart, you're such a good person, you should do this, has been telling him to do. Instead of admitting that, he just has a heart attack and like, he doesn't really have a heart attack, but he has a kind of psychosomatic panic attack, identity crisis, and I think existential death is a making a virtue of necessity in that sense. So that keeps happening to Heidegger when he's supposed to go fight in the war. They say, oh, he's got health problems, weak heart. That's what they call soldier's heart. It's like PTSD. You're traumatized and can't pull it together to do stuff that probably nobody should be able to do, right? So in some ways, it's like a healthier response, but you can't consciously acknowledge it because of your superegoic injunctions and all this stuff. So that's the part of the connection of death. The Junger bit is interesting because in Storm of Steel and his other novels, which were bestsellers in the German world, he talks about the experience of the trench warfare. Now, Heidegger's not in the trenches. He's in the meteorological weather service. Those are the guys who are charting the weather. And that's important because in World War I, they used gas attacks where it's pre-Nazi, so it's the Germans would throw out gas canisters, and when the gas was blowing toward the Allies, the Americans and Europe and English and others, and what would happen is then while we're choking and firing blindly into the gas, they'd put on their gas masks and run out and try and kill us. So Vorlaufen zum Tode, charging out into death, is running out into that storm of steel, that bullet's coming at you. So it's not like anticipating a relation to death. It's like entering into death. And Junger has this kind of samurai view. Like, I don't know how much of the samurai, I had a student, Adam Bubin, who works on Kierkegaard and Heidegger and stuff, and he was super into samurai. And the interesting thing about, the Bushido, the code of the samurai, is like, whichever samurai is less afraid of death wins. So it's this idea of like you and how do you get that unafraid of death? By already dying. You're already dead, but you go into the battle dead. Yeah, and then you never lose is this kind of thing. And it's fascinating, but that's the connection between Junger and Heidegger and being in time. There's rumors that Junger got Heidegger to do mescaline with him. Yeah, I could never, unfortunately, substantiate this. And people who, it's some of the later, I would believe it because, as someone who dropped acid my first week in college, I think that's part of what attracted me to Heidegger was I started with later Heidegger. I didn't know he was a Nazi when I fell in love with him. Like the way Dreyfus taught it was early and then later. And early he started off, of course, he was a Nazi, but we can't handle that in early Heidegger. And so later Heidegger, nobody mentioned that. But I'd gone through a version of this already because my first philosophers were like Jefferson, and I was dating a black woman, and and Jefferson, who wrote so beautifully about freedom, has slaves and stuff. So that was like a trauma for me in high school that I couldn't. So the Heidegger thing I held on to and tried to work through that, and that's my first book, 2005, is the product of me struggling with that issue since like 1988. So quite a while, and I've written a bunch of that since then, trying to come to terms with. I think in general people lack a fine-grained ability to, like, they hear Nazism and they're just like, oh, fuck him. Why would I read that guy? So, and I can respect that. But the interesting thing is, if you look at Heidegger, his views are much more complicated. Like, he is explicitly and publicly contesting the murderous vision of like eugenic purity that is what we associate with those of us who think of Nazism. We mostly think of as the attempt to purify the gene pool by any means necessary, this violent technologized destruction, first of enemies and then the mentally ill and anyone who was seen as genetically defective, and then Jewish people, right? At the end, that was the largest group of people that they were trying to get rid of. So that's Heidegger from the beginning was opposed to what he called the biologism, that is the reduction of the human being to their biology or to anything biology, namely Darwin, could account for. So he thought this Darwinistic eugenic view, eugenics, good genes, let's purify the genes, which was big in America, big in England. Ford's writing things about how great Hitler is and Churchill is too. They're writing about, oh yeah, the international Jewish conspiracy. They were all fooled by that. Heidegger was fooled by that. Yeah. So, there's when in 1933, when Heidegger becomes the first Nazi rector of Freiburg University, the president of the university, a leader of the Nazi movement comes to town and gives a speech about eugenic purity, and Heidegger spends the whole next day talking about that's a betrayal of the what's known as the inner truth and greatness of National Socialism, which was his idea that the movement, now that it's captured all these people, could be led to a second and more profound awakening in which it would discover the true meaning of revolution, which is this connection of the Germans to the Greeks. It's basically, we need to get Hitler to recognize me, Heidegger, as his grand vizier, and let me guide the movement philosophically to give it a true meaning, so it's not just this stupid eugenic reductionism. It's basically Steve Bannon to Trump, and that's why I think Bannon says, oh, Heidegger, that's my guy. I hope that's what he means by that, but I think probably not. So it's something like that, and there's people are worried, well, there's this alternative stuff in the Black Notebooks, and but if you look carefully at what the Black Notebooks say, yes, Heidegger is anti-Semitic. No one ever denied that. If you're reading his work carefully, you've known that the whole time. But he was not in favor of the Holocaust, and he was not in favor when he talks about like the internal enemies of the German people, he's not talking about Jewish people. He's talking in that context about people who are incapable of, this is most Nietzschean period, of accepting the thought of eternal return as this demand that you be willing to live your life over and over again in order to find it meaningful. So it's hard because, as Derrida said a long time ago in Of Spirit, if say America gets taken over by a totalitarian government, this could never happen, right? And they secure all the means of communication, delegitimate all alternative parties. So the only way to have power in America is to join the Make America Great Again movement. How are you going to do it? How are you going to actually, what Heidegger would do would be take the buzzwords, Kampf, Führen, and give them a new meaning where they don't mean what they meant for everybody else, where they mean what his philosophy means. Oh, you guys are all in the Kampf. Let me tell you the true Kampf, which is the struggle of the human with being. And, oh, you want to be led? Well, to lead, you must follow being and all this stuff. So he's trying to redirect the movement into his own philosophy. It's like if you say, make America great again, but I want to make America great again. It's just that America means Amerigos, the land of the worker ruler, and greatness isn't quantitative, it's qualitative. It's about like actually having a meaningful life. So for that, we need to restore the dignity to work. And of course, the National Socialist Workers Party said a lot of these things, and this is Heidegger's kids were into it, and they were like playing guitars around campfires. It was very Boy Scouty, and and that's part of what they co-opted. And it's impossible for us now not to judge it by what it became. But the thing is that Heidegger was internally opposed to that. And that's a complicated thing that people, he's got lots of problems, including his anti-Semitism, which makes it hard to see all of that. But that's my view. I've defended in print a bunch. And I don't think that's I don't take myself to be bending over backwards to apologize for Heidegger. I'm just saying, if you look at what the texts say and you've learned how to read Heidegger by reading it for 30 years, I think that's what it says. Yeah.
And then before I ask my final question that I've said I was dying to ask, I just want to check with you both, and also you will. I mean, do any of you have anything that you're gonna feel remiss if you do not raise now?
Not in this conversation. I've got dinner questions.
Same.
But I've really enjoyed this conversation because I've read the first part of Being in Time once and then taken like a course from Dave with Theory Underground.
Cool.
And so it makes more sense than if I had no idea.
The death book, it can be the death book, which is here somewhere, is I'm teaching Being in Time next semester, and I'm going to use it. So as a way to kind of try and this is how do you integrate research and teaching? So you get out to the front lines, you make a few little advances here and there, and then you pass those on to the next generation so they can go out even further under the front lines and make new advances, and then they've got to do that to the next generation, right? This is so time energy, yo.
Yeah.
I want to have follow-up conversations because I think I do have a lot to say. I have a problem with inframing, but to raise that now would take too long. But I do want to raise it.
And we'll read the new book before, and we'll bring you on for that. Yeah, that'd be awesome. Okay, then the last one is, I don't know where I heard it. I don't know why I know it. I don't know if we've talked about it publicly before or not. But you were going into football, and then you went into philosophy. And we've talked about existential world collapse and big changes, and you think you're this, your identity's that, becomes something else. Football to philosophy is not a transition you hear about a lot. In fact, sports and arts often are juxtaposed, and then reading's like way down there, right? Way down on the list. And so I just kind of wanted to hear about how you got into it, and I hope that maybe by sharing your story with us, workers with earbuds all across the world will feel inspired, because if you're listening to this stuff online, the chances are you are searching and you are in transition between worlds.
Yeah. Nice. And if you're like me, you're listening at 2x.
Yeah.
Yeah. Time energy. Yeah. So hopefully I was speaking so fast earlier that you couldn't listen to that 2x and you had to slow it down. Yeah. Yeah.
I hate it when I have to go one.
Yeah. What did he say? Rewind. So football in the European sense, not American football. Yeah. Not to say that that's impossible, but yeah, the traumatic brain injury, I think, might be a further hindrance in the case of American football. So yeah, I was a soccer player and serious athlete. That was what I was living for recess most of my life. You're talking about like training the little kids, especially the boys, to sit still in class, and that was very brutal for me and traumatic. And I would certainly have been ADHD and given all the medications to sit still, etc. So, but I lived a little before that, and I think part of the appeal of Heidegger is that it speaks to people who are good at like embodied skills. Like Sean Kelly, the guy who wrote All Things Shining with Bert Dreyfuss, he's now the dean of the humanities at Harvard. He was a swimmer in college, and I think a lot of the other Heidegger people I know were musicians, or they all had some talent where if you say to somebody, what propositional rules are you following when you're playing soccer or playing music or swimming at a high level? Express to me in words what soccer feels like, or skating or swimming. You will realize the impossibility of that. And it's like a confusion that you should be able to do that. You're like, you think you can put dance into words? That's why they're dancing, because the words ran out, so phenomenology, and especially the phenomenology of being in time, is about how this practical, embodied, skillful relation of reality is more basic and ordinary for human beings than this disengaged theoretical attitude, and that you have to have the embodied one before you can have the theoretical one, and that you can explain the theoretical one from a breakdown of the embodied one, but you can't explain the embodied one theoretically. So this is the first half of Being in Time. The division 1 is about a critique of Cartesian dualism, which is the splitting of consciousness in the world, by saying what we are most of the time is not a mind over against an embodied world of objects. Instead, we are an integral entwinement, a skillful entwinement with the world, where the skateboard's not an object standing over against my mind. It's a part of my skilled gearing into the world that as I experience myself. And sadly, yes, as you get older, some of these skills diminish, and you got to find some other ways to develop your skills. And I think there's a lot of them, and some of them are get wiser. For a while, you can be like, well, I can't run as fast, I can't kick the ball as hard, but I can be smarter about where I go on the field or who I pass to and that kind of thing. But even that eventually wears out as the pain of the body builds up. So then you got to think about, well, there's other skills that I can develop, like teaching, like philosophizing, that part of that is responding to like the decay of the meat bag that you're in, and learning to see some of that as things to work with and through, right? Instead of just fighting it all the time and trying to like live forever. The last chapter of the Death Book is a critique of this inframed, get the most for the least in these projects of people who are trying to live forever, whether through just endless, like, let me get my son's blood all the time, or, or to download yourself onto the neural net and then get like clone bodies you can keep uploading yourself into. I don't know if you've seen Altered Carbon, which is a really good sci-fi dystopian vision of this playing out. And
that new movie, what's it called?
I haven't seen that yet, but a lot of my friends are talking about that. I want to see. I will see it for sure. On that, Mickey 17, yeah. But thanks for having me. It was really fun, and yeah, let's do it again.
Let's go get dinner.
Dinner.
Yeah.
Winner, vegan dinner. Are you guys vegan? Okay. There's a good vegan place near here.
Let's go there. Yeah, you want to go there?
Vegan food for me?
Anne's been wanting to go to vegan food with everyone for the whole tour.
Convince them to come eat not meat.
It's good food even if you're not vegan.
Yeah, that's what I like to hear.
There's other place we go that would have vegetarian.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Theory Underground exists to cultivate the conditions necessary for a working-class intellectual renaissance that goes beyond old political categories or other identitarian niches. At TU, autodidact workers with earbuds and professionals who see no future in existing institutions or movements are able to challenge their doxa and develop an understanding of the situation we are in.
If you subscribe at theoryunderground.com, you'll get access to a package of courses, including my Intro to Fault Line Theory, which includes Intro to Nick Land and Intro to Slavoj Žižek. These courses are being woven with the 3 courses that take place on a month-to-month basis, spread out throughout the year of 2025. Those courses are 12 Core Concepts and the Fundamental Problems with the Situation Today with social theorist David McKerracher, 12 Essential Political Thinkers with political theorist Benjamin Studebaker, and The Philosophy of Nature with philosopher Nina Power.
The way these all get woven together at a deeper and more meta level is through the ongoing research seminars led by David McKerracher, Benjamin Studebaker, and Michael Downs, where they engage with one another's work by sharing developments from their own perspectives, theory, and research.
If you subscribe at higher levels and support our work, we'll support your development with bespoke teaching. Alone and unaided, we struggle to grasp our situation in its fullness and formulate a meaningful response. By working together and pooling our energies, we can do better. Join us at theoryunderground.com/subscribe.
There'll be 2 kinds of people in 10 years. Those who said, I knew all along Theory Underground was going to make this huge difference. Those are the people that are like Nance, who were on the sidelines at one point and then said, nah, I'm going to get in. I'm going to roll up my sleeves and I'm going to go hard. And then there's another kind of person, a person who waits in the wings, collects receipts, and who will say in 10 years, oh yeah, I was there. I saw that happen. And then they'll gossip monger. Listen, if you want to get involved, get involved. But if you're going to sit there in the bleachers, well, here's some popcorn. I hope you have fun.